work life and their home life, and sometimes they're quite isolated at home, and so they don't have the contact with other people in those scenarios. And for me personally, I've struggled with my mental health in the workplace, and I've tried my best to sort of disguise that and work with my co-workers, but a lot of them don't have any knowledge of those kind of things because they are sheltered in certain aspects. And I think, you know, when people do only have that commute to and from work, especially now being isolated working at home, you do need to check up on people and touch base and things like that. We have a co-worker who lives alone, and you know, we all like to just check up on her because she doesn't have any pets, or you know, she's been taken away from having her time at the gym, which was her coping mechanism. You know, it's just about sending that message, or you know, making sure that they're okay, because some people don't have people to check up on them, and some people might be struggling with things that other people don't understand because they're not educated in mental health.
Yeah, and I think I kind of think that. So again, in one of the podcasts, I spoke to a good friend who's a assistant head teacher in a school in Kent where I used to live, and mental health is being introduced more and more into schools education, but I think it needs. I think myself and Joe spoke about it on my podcast, but it needs to become more prevalent in both primary and secondary schools, just so that children are aware of mental illness, full stop. Because it's I think we've spoken about it before, but I didn't know what mental health was until probably I was late teens, and because you don't know what you don't know, do you? And it's one of those subjects that just needs to be taught properly, I think
that education needs to start from a young age, and we touched upon it as well, you know, from the aspect of when we went through my experience at school and being bullied. You know, there's so many young people that are kind of singled out, victimized, and who are bullied because there's such a broad spectrum of mental illness. There's so many different conditions, and it affects so many people in different ways as well. And that education, starting from a very young age, it makes it, just putting the education in there, there's less stigma attached to it. It's not that person's a bit weird. It's the understanding the reasons for it. And the pandemic for me has been a bit of a blessing, because there's people, even without underlying an underlying diagnosis of any sort of mental illness, have been struggling. And it's really put that focus back on, actually, we need to look after each other and think twice before we start judging other people.
But I think also a lot of kindness has come out of the pandemic. You know, people have reached out, they've helped one another, you know, even down to doing groceries for elderly neighbours. They're clapping for the NHS, a bit controversial in certain aspects, but, you know, it's that sense of community. You know, the food banks where people have been really struggling. So many people are so much more willing to chip in and help their neighbours and their communities. Whereas before, I think as a nation, generally, we can be very insular with our own thoughts and feelings and worries. And because the world, yes, it is still busy, but not to the same aspect where you've got so many excuses or so many things going on in the background that you forget, you know, the people around you. And now, you know, that's all been drawn back in, and in our times of isolation, we have really understood and appreciated the people around us and helped them in ways that we wouldn't have done before. And I think that is something for us to be proud of.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think we've all seen that the world's a bit of a kinder place, even with social media. Without the pandemic, I probably wouldn't have met James and yourself, Luke. Social media is used in not very nice ways, and I think that's been focused on so much without the pandemic happening. But actually, the networking, the kindness that's spread throughout the social hemisphere, I think that's the word. It's been quite amazing. There was one issue that obviously needed addressing, and I think I know we're a bit short for time with both of you, but I think it's important that is discussed as well. You know, domestic violence is a massive issue, something that affects a lot of women and a lot of men. But before the pandemic, we all knew it happened, but when the pandemic hit, like that social isolation, and unfortunately there were people obviously at home with their victims and weren't allowed to go out. What really came apparent is actually how massive domestic violence is. And I wanted to touch upon the issue here. You know, anyone that might listen back to this podcast, there was a 75% increase in the first 2 months of domestic violence incidents. And you think of that, like the impact on someone's mental health, the PTSD as well. And I mean, what both of you guys do, you know, Luke, the awareness that you spread and the not feeling alone, and how the country pulled together as well. Like James, the work you do, I'm sure you've spoken to people who might have been victims of domestic violence as well. But the world came together to really reach out, to offer an olive branch. We saw Victoria Derbyshire on the BBC with a simple trick, writing a helpline on her arm just in case a victim saw it.
There was a group of men who had a removal company that went round, and I think it was something like 180 different victims they helped move out of the place of danger into a safe environment for no cost. It was all just purely because so many people were trapped with no place to go. You know, they didn't have the resources to leave, and yet these amazing people just said, look, where do you need to go? We'll get you there, all for free, don't worry about it. And they got these women and these men and these families into safe environments, and just doing something like that is absolutely amazing. Like, think about how much time that would have taken out of one person's day to help one person, you know, just move a few bits of furniture, get them settled in, you know, and that's changed someone's life completely. And it is just amazing to think that there are so many people that are struggling, that are stuck in these kinds of environments, and yet there are these people out there that are helping them, and we just need more of them.
Absolutely. And just like around 75% of an increase is absolutely huge.
Definitely.
And it's so sad that it's taken a pandemic to actually see that. But like you guys said, with the kindness of other people and people just recognising, like so Victoria Derbyshire, who had the helpline on her arm, the removal men that you guys were saying, I think it's incredible. And it's like, because I come from a background of working in an emergency department within the hospital, so we had training and on domestic abuse and trying to spot victims and stuff like that. And we have like these wee they look like lipsticks and sometimes pens, but and sometimes even just like wee helpline cards, but not necessarily on domestic violence. It could be just an information card on children's parties, as an example. But on it, there's a secret barcode, and in that barcode, there's a number to call.
That's amazing.
And just wee things like that, I think, is absolutely powerful. But in my line of work, I don't specialize in this subject whatsoever. But through my work, there has been people who have been victims in the past, and just being able to talk about their lived experiences and in domestic violence and whatever associated with mental health also. That alone, being that peer and being able to speak out and advocate that it's okay to speak out, it's okay to reach out, is absolutely huge. It's probably one of the biggest tools I say that we could use.
I think it is one of the hardest things, being through situations like that, having to admit to yourself that those things have happened and that you have these problems and that you need help is so huge, because people in that situation do tend to hide it. Like you said, you have to try spot it. Nobody goes around advertising that that's the kind of situation they're in. So people being wary and being aware just of certain signs and things like that, and just offering something slightly hidden as well, because that gives you more confidence to accept it. You don't want to be taking leaflets on domestic violence with all these big, pictures and signs, because that puts you in more danger. So yeah, definitely having those sort of subtle hints being recognised, and the sort of unfortunately underhand ways of helping people is really important, because sometimes you're not really willing to understand or accept that kind of situation.
Absolutely. And like my parents were in a domesticated relationship, and my mum carried on for 17 years in that sort of a relationship, and she didn't recognize it, she didn't accept it until just one time it was just enough was enough. She did see that it was wrong, and it wasn't just affecting wasn't affecting her, but it was affecting us all. And she was able to make that change. And so now, now growing up, my mum's out of that relationship for a long time now, thank goodness. But she had the strength to be able to speak up. It might have taken her 17 years to do it, but she did it. And
exactly.
As I said to my mum, my mum would still feel really guilty that it took her that long. But I'd say to my mum, celebrates that you did.
It shows a real strength, doesn't it? And I think something which a lot of us take for granted. So obviously, I know time is of the essence. Luke, I think you've got something happening, haven't you, in about 15 minutes?
Yeah. My wife's doing New Year's Eve dinner.
Lovely. So as well as it being a bit of a negative year for a lot of people, we've touched upon a lot of awareness that's happened throughout the year, and actually the things that this year has taught a lot of us. One of the things I will say as well is like the materialistic things that I think a lot of us focused on, like having the best phone or best clothes, but actually things so close to home, like just the sound of nature, having complete freedom in how we move around, live our lives, was something we took for granted before. But I think now I hope it will carry on, that appreciation for what we really do have in life, not for those materialistic things that I'll go to the shop, get the most updated phone or whatever. And hopefully, when this is over, it's something that we will all focus on. But if you could say 2020 has taught you any life lessons, what would you both say it has taught you? I touched upon some in an article I wrote, like self-care is a priority, not a privilege, as one example of what I think this year has really taught a lot of people. But Luke and James, what things would you say are the key things to take from this year, which are life lessons, which hopefully bit of a negative year has taught us all?
I think one of mine is that, like you just said, you don't actually need a lot of the stuff that you have, and